With so much content out there, how do you filter through all the noise and cut straight to the value? What has become very apparent is that the best way to learn is to surround yourself with those you aspire to be. But you can't just watch what they do. At some point, you have to turn it into an action. Knowledge isn't power. Applied knowledge is power. On this podcast, you will go on a journey as we speak to people who are making a difference in their industries, and people who, if we listen to closely and take action, can turn you into who you want to be. My name is Mark Sclair, and this is Your Turning Point.
Yeah.
5 key points, yeah.
So again, I'm very mindful about the authenticity here.
Yeah.
But I'm also a big believer in actually, if you follow good recipes. You know, if you were going to make a muffin or a chocolate brownie, you know, the easiest way of doing that is to actually go and look on, Google it and then actually follow the recipe.
Yeah, I like it, yeah.
You get the ingredients.
Yeah.
So I would say there's probably, in my experience, there's kind of 5 ingredients.
Okay.
But then you have to have those ingredients in the way, you mix them in the way that is authentic to you. So don't just blindly kind of like say, oh, if I do these 5 things, it's going to work for me. So that's important.
Okay, that's your disclaimer.
Yeah, that's my disclaimer.
Yeah.
If I kind of rattle through them quickly, and then perhaps we can go into a more detailed, dive into each of the areas. So I think the first one is clarity. Number one, most important thing is clarity. People need to know where they're going. They need to understand that. The second one is they do overwhelmingly. I ask this question. It's feedback. Okay. People need feedback. They need feedback, and they actually need recognition, but they need feedback. We'll give some examples around that. So number one is clarity. Number 2 is feedback. Number 3 is they need to understand the role they play within the team. Yeah. So I always call that input versus output. Yeah. Okay. And then number 4 is that people genuinely like to feel they're kind of growing with you. So if they're learning from you and they're kind of moving in the right direction, then it's great. And then number 5 for me is that kind of care and that kindness piece. Okay. And it's, the kind of Mayo stuff. So if you hit those 5 things, clarity, you develop your feedback skills, receiving it and giving it. You help people understand input versus output, how they work in the team. You literally are showing them how to learn and grow, and you're wrapping it up with some kindness and care. Actually, it's a winning combination for me.
Okay, all right, let's go a little bit deeper on this, and let's get a bit of clarity now.
Yeah.
So that's the first point. So what do you mean by clarity?
Clarity is I need to understand the direction of travel. I need to understand the why. Why are we going? Why are we doing this?
Okay.
Yeah. Why? What's the purpose of doing this? I need to have, specific actions that I'm kind of heading towards. So we often use the word, that's kind of smarter model. Well, most people kind of say smart. I prefer to have smarter.
Okay.
The smarter for me, it's, the big focus areas is being very specific about what I'm asking Mark to do. Yeah. And actually agreeing it with Mark, which is the A. Yeah, so it's the M, the A, the R, the T, the MART piece, measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound. Yeah. They're relatively simple because if you're specific with Mark what you're expecting him to do, and you're basically getting Mark's agreement with that, then it works. If you just get specific and you don't get Mark's agreement, you will fail. Yeah. So you have to do the S and the A, the specific and the agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I think sometimes you just assume that someone has understood what you've said. Yeah. As well, like they need to repeat back, like, okay, so this is the plan. There's the clarity. Like, tell me kind of what
you understand about it. Yeah. Describe what you've heard. Yeah. Tell me what you've heard. Explain what your next steps are. I think that's really, really important. But also when you're doing that, and when people are giving you their kind of their plans for executing what you've agreed, the big thing for me. It's really hard as well because the older I get, the harder it becomes. Yeah. Is actually just, Mark says, oh, I think I'm going to do this, and this. And I go, oh, brilliant, Mark, and just do this as well. Yeah. That is a bad move on my part. Even if I'm hearing Mark saying things that I think there's probably an easier way of doing it, I would much prefer to let Mark do that. Yeah. And not interrupt. Because as soon as I say, oh, that's a really, really fun, I love that. That's a really good idea, Mark. Or just think about doing this as well. You've lost it, because then suddenly you've taken back responsibility. Yeah. You're taking it away from Mark because it's not his ideas anymore. If you're giving Mark those that's really, really fantastic, Mark, crack on. I'm here if you need me. Let me know when you need me. That's absolutely fantastic. Don't try and add a little bit of yourself, and you think you're doing him a favor, but you're not. Genuinely, you're not.
I think that goes nicely on to the second point, really, which is the feedback.
Yeah. So back to the early part of this session.
Feedback,
it's honest feedback, and I think it's really. Again, it's seeking it yourself. From what I found in my career, the more that you seek feedback from your team, the more that you seek feedback from the people around you, what tends to happen is that then it opens the door for people to be asking for feedback. Feedback is much easier delivered if someone's asking for it. If Mark says, "Oh, you've got some feedback for me," it's much easier to me to give the feedback, right? Because he's contracting for me to do that, right? Obviously, if Mark bursts into tears as I'm giving him the feedback, then probably in the future when he says, "Oh, can you give me some feedback?" and I'll say, "Well, not today, Mark, because I don't really want Mark crying," right? And I think a lot of people, I'm using that as a metaphor, really.
No, I get it.
Doesn't cry, Mark doesn't cry, but tough man.
I'm emotional.
Yeah. But the reality is you want to, you really want to, when you're giving feedback or you're receiving feedback, you've got to be just, thank you for the feedback.
Yeah.
That's it. Halas. Yeah. You can perhaps say, "Oh, can you, would you mind giving me an example of when I've shown you that behavior?"
Yeah.
That's good. So I think that's helpful. But even that probably is too much for me. I would rather just, if Mark's got that perception about me and I'm seeking feedback, and it's a two-way street. So if I'm opening myself up and I'm reacting to the feedback and I'm listening and I'm trying to work on the things that people say I need to be better at, and it's a very long list, Mark, at least then it encourages other people to say, well, actually, while we're having a conversation about how we could improve our relationship, Mark, what can I do in this situation?
Yeah. I mean, I had a really good conversation with Emma Jourdain. She focuses on cultural intelligence.
Amazing. Yeah.
And we spoke about when she came over from the UK over to Dubai or the Middle East. And in the UK, people are quite open to give their opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she asked her team, give me feedback, let me know how I'm doing, anything you want to question, please challenge me. And they wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. They wouldn't do it because that just isn't in their nature to do it. And she had to kind of build the trust there to know that they can give feedback and they're not going to be judged for it or challenged for it. She wanted to know so she could improve and hopefully improve the team and the business.
Yeah. I always kind of go back to sort of two bosses in one of them is a sort of famous television celebrity who I work with, and they're both this guy was obviously, he's wealthy, very, very wealthy man. He appears on TV quite a lot. And then you've got another guy who's not on TV, but he's probably far wealthier than the other guy, sort of Dutch guy. And one of the most important things for me, particularly around feedback, is, the first guy, he would always, shoot the messenger.
Okay.
Yeah. So he was kind of limiting himself. He didn't really get, and if you tried to give him any bad news, it was a disaster. Yeah. So he just wouldn't listen to bad news, and he'd just go absolutely fly into a rage, right? And he would actually calm down, and then he'd kind of go into reflective afterwards, and then we'd try and talk about it. But it was that horrendous rage that people just didn't want to experience that. No. So they stayed away from it. And of course, often problems sort of built up and built up and built up, where it was a point where we had to give him the information. Yeah. And everyone was running around, who's going to give him the information? Right.
Do you want a short straw?
Let's go out the back and let's do some rock, paper, scissors on who's giving him the bad news. But on the other hand, for me, Harm was amazing, because Harm used to always say it's about how quickly I get the bad news, right? How quickly I get the feedback, because that's important, so I can deal with that. Yeah. So, his ability when he was given bad news and how he could react to the bad news or how he could react to feedback was always amazing. So, and that then people felt safe around Harm. Yeah. Because, he was a guy who kind of created that space for safety. Yeah. So you wanted to kind of give him the information, which I think is a really important point for leadership, because you've got to allow your team, like Emma said, it's allowing people to feel safe with you, and giving you the kind of bad news, because unfortunately it is pretty shitty being a leader. I think the other thing I would say, a lot of people seem to think that there's some kind of crown that comes with leadership, and that when you're made the leader, you then become like the crown, and people you are the servant to your team. Yeah. It's not, they are not your servants. No. Yeah. A lot of people really struggle with the idea that, now I'm the manager, I'm the leader, everyone around me is my servant, and they have to jump when I tell them to jump. And it's for me, that's absolutely the opposite. You become the absolute servant to your team, because making them, serving them, making sure they have what they need, the clarity, have the feedback, they understand the role they're playing. That's really important.
Yeah, no, I agree. So going into the third point here, which is input versus output.
Yeah, we've covered this before, but it's really just helping people understand the specific role they play within the team. So if you look at, there's a guy called John Adair, and there's a really fantastic model called action-centered leadership.
Action-centered leadership.
Yeah, and ACL, and action-centered leadership, is basically taught at Santos. It's a military thing, and actually the French military use it, because I've been speaking to a lot of French kind of people recently who are in, they said, oh, we use ACL, and definitely the Emirati military use ACL as well. Lots of the big kind of militaries around the world, they teach their leadership around, action-centered leadership, and actually there's three sort of parts to that. There's clearly defining the task. Yeah, understanding the individual's contribution to the task, and actually helping the team understand what everyone else is doing. Because if you do those three things, it makes a big difference. So, for me, input versus output is that Mark understands the role he plays within the team, within the task, so that he's kind of like comfortable with that. Yeah. If he doesn't really understand how important he is, because it's like on a football pitch or a hockey pitch or a rugby pitch, different players play different positions. Yeah. And it's exactly the same in business. We all play different positions. Those positions aren't good, better, or worse. We're one team. Yeah. So I work with big corporate, but we still play critical roles within the organization. Yeah. We play different roles. We have different skill sets. So I'd still have the same goal in mind. We still have the same task in mind. Yeah. And so if we understand what the task is, what we're striving for, what our future end game is, and we understand how my contribution makes a massive difference to that, and actually I understand what my team members are doing around me, it makes it much easier to communicate. Because if I don't get those three things right, it becomes a nightmare. If I go purely task focused, it becomes an autocracy. It's bullying, it's harassing, and obviously people get very stressed. Because if I'm purely about how amazing Mark is, actually people should be more like Mark. Right, that'd be, if we had more Marks in the team, it'd be great. It'll be catastrophic, because then Mark gets this huge ego, we turn to silos, and it's a disaster. Yeah, sure. If we're just focusing on making sure everyone's happy, then we're not going to achieve the task. And actually, people don't really like that, because people do want to feel that they're special. I don't like that word particularly, but I think we're all unique, right? And I think people need to feel that they're not just part of some, like, we're not the Borg. We want to add our own kind of like flavor to it. So I think that's important as well. So input versus output.
Yeah, I think different personalities, different types of people, but they're working towards one common goal, which is clearly stated. You can't assume that they know what's going on as well. You have to keep them up to date. It has to cascade from the top to the bottom. Yeah. And a lot of the time it doesn't happen, does it? It kind of gets watered down from every conversation, and it gets to the bottom, and it was like Chinese whispers. Can you say Chinese whispers these days? Maybe not. But it's like we said one thing at the beginning and it's been seen completely other way at the bottom.
Definitely during COVID, it was amazing, because when I worked, obviously during COVID, I was working in aviation, and we had literally daily Teams calls with everyone. It was a big team, more than 100 people. But we had a daily Teams call, which was we all dialed into, and we were able to update everyone. And I think we were the most cohesive. That was probably the most cohesive time of the team, because although we weren't seeing each other face to face, because actually calling a meeting to get 100 people into a room and kind of brief them and get them to ask questions is quite difficult face to face. But on a virtual situation, actually being able to explain quickly that everyone, and we actually could record it as well. Yeah. So, if Mark wasn't able to join the meeting because he was doing something else, he was able to kind of listen back to it. Yeah. So there was complete and utter clarity around kind of what we were doing. As a team, which made a big difference. I think it's really, because we knew what the tasks were, we knew the individuals, what they were doing, we knew basically how everyone was kind of playing, and it made that was a really important time for me. Yeah.
And who was responsible for those tasks as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's it's really, really, really important. We had that conversation with sort of TGI Fridays before. You've got big sort of lots of moving parts, but managers need to understand how those kind of parts integrate with each other, but other the individual parts within the team need to understand how their role is critical to the success of the team. So I think that's, and it's almost like that I think we probably had that conversation with the busser in TGI Fridays, but it's the same thing. Like he needs to understand, or she needs to understand, that bussing the table, it seems like a really kind of like basic simple task, but it's actually a really critical task. Yeah, or cleaning the bathrooms. Yeah, cleaning the bathrooms. It seems like a really that's below me. I don't really want to do that. That's kind of rubbish. But actually, it has a massive impact. Because when the customer goes into the restaurant, I go and have dinner in a nice restaurant. If I go to the bathroom and the bin's overflowing, and the floor's wet, horrible. It just, the impression I get, I don't know about you, Mark, but the impression I get is that the rest of the business is run like that.
Definitely. Yeah, I agree.
So I think, what's happening in the kitchen? If they can't get the bin emptied here and they can't basically mop the floor, and there's shite walk down the toilet, what's happening in the kitchen, in the fridge, right? And I'm eating here. So it gives me a really negative feeling. Yeah. And
it's the same about a person as well.
Yeah.
Like if you see them doing one thing in a bad way, you judge them. They're going to be like that for everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It amazes me. We have, back to my sort of door hosting, from a restaurant point of view, it amazes me how you walk up and you just see these. It makes me really, actually, I don't go to those businesses now because they just, your door host is sort of like sitting. They see you coming and there's no even attempt to open the door. Like you're like it's like, oh my God, what are you doing, mate? Get off your ass and open the door for me. I don't even expect to open. It's not that in no way is it derogatory, but actually just be a bit more present and just be, rather than just sitting there, just like, looking at Facebook on your phone, actually just get in the moment for a moment. Because that gives me that first impression of how I'm kind of walking into the restaurant, just feeds right the way through the entire experience. If you get me off on a bad foot, it's a nightmare, particularly if something else happens then that I'm not happy with. It rapidly, goes downhill, right?
Even in the studio here, I come in, I always have a hot cup of water for my throat. And, the guy there, every time I come in, he's like, hot cup of water, Mr. Mark?
Anticipating, see?
Perfect. Absolutely amazing, yeah. And I just loved like the quote with Richard Branson as well, which is, the customer is not the most important, the employee is the most important. Yeah. Because they are the ones that are front and center. Like that person that was probably meant to get the door, he probably doesn't feel appreciated or supported or guided. So he's like, well, I'm not going to bother then. But if that person had a pep in his step and he knew what his responsibilities were and he felt part of the team, he'd open that door and you'd be like, the whole experience is great for you.
Yeah, it's just, and we human beings are thinking at 200 thousandths of a second. We're thinking really fast, and we're acting unconsciously. 90% of the time we're acting unconsciously, probably higher than that. So everything we're doing is kind of responsive. We're not. We're just programmed to act in a certain way, and we could get. Gosh, there's some really great stuff we could do on that, but that's another podcast probably. Let's not go there today.
Okay, well, let's go into point 4 here, which is personal growth.
Yeah, so I think people need to feel they're learning with you. So I've interviewed some amazing leaders around the world. Some like real kind of like standout, stellar people, and I think the one thing that I've taken lots of learning from that. I think the one thing that's really, really important for me, and I've heard it repeated times, is not sort of like not staying in one role for very long. So if I ask these people, how long they've been in a particular job, they say typically I don't really want to be in a job for more than a year. I want to be in a job for literally 12 months, and I want to be doing something different. I'm not saying a company, because you might hold different roles within companies. I work with the brilliant Alshire group, and I held multiple roles with Alshire, right? So that's absolutely fine, because I still kind of felt I was learning with those guys. So I wasn't just doing one thing for 7 years, right? But if you're just doing the same thing, I talk to people with my current employer, and they say, I've been working for 18 years in this role. I'm like, they kind of seem to wear that as a badge of honor, and I'm like, I actually feel really sorry for you, because you're just doing the same thing for 18 years.
You know what? Most people come back and say that. Oh, you don't see that very often these days. You're committed to your job. Everyone kind of jumps around.
I just think it's just really I've got some pups. I shouldn't be recording them on video here, but sometimes I think, really, just taking the easiest path, because it's back to the unknown, right? I know we haven't discussed that, but there's that piece around if you're doing the same thing for 18 years, you just don't know the unknown. The unknown, you could have missed all these amazing opportunities that you could have done. You could have been learning. You could have been far more successful. This particular comment has been resonating with me quite a lot over the last few days. I've got a couple of friends who work at Harvard University, and we catch up maybe 2 or 3 times a year. And anyway, so it was that time to catch up with them. And one of the professors said to me, "Do you think you've reached your full potential, Andrew?" And I was like, great question. I don't know. We're not completely convinced you've reached your full potential, And I was like, wow, thank you for this. Obviously, I get back to that feedback, right? It's their perception.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing with that, because sometimes I feel that people expect more from me than what I'm doing. And that can, like what he said, like we expect you to do more than what you're doing. And that can be like, oh yeah, I want to do more. It's like, I'm not ashamed of myself. You know, it's a challenge that I face. Like I see friends that are like, oh, you're doing well, but I expect you to be here by now.
Yeah,
And that's a great thing as a friend, but then it also doesn't make me feel great as well.
But that's the unknown, right? And I think you need to be challenging people so
Yeah.
that they can experience the unknown, so that they feel they're kind of growing. So people they need to feel that they're learning new things with you. So they need new opportunities.
Yeah.
They need to be challenged, because I think otherwise the mind just, it just sort of petrifies. It just starts sort of going to jelly. So I think they need to be challenged. But then that's the whole change piece. That's back to leadership. It's like, why are we doing that? Why are we giving Mark that, that challenge? Yeah. Yes, it's important. He needs to understand the clarity around why we're doing that. Yeah. He needs to be given the feedback as he's doing it. But that's also the fourth point, which is I feel I'm kind of growing and learning. And I feel that actually this is really, really hard doing this with Andrew, but I'm learning much faster, And I think most people, again, just hit this point where they kind of go on that classic sort of journey where I don't know that I don't know. Then suddenly they realize they know that they don't know. And then they kind of like, they start moving into, I know that I know. And then they kind of like almost do it unconsciously, but they then plateau. So, we've got to if you really want to keep growing and learning, you have to then be doing things much faster.
Yeah.
So it's actually how much can I do that task faster and faster and faster? Because that's how you really move it on. Otherwise you reach a point where you're not really growing. Yeah, you just kind of like, again, just sort of plateauing, really. So, anyway.
But I think some people, they feel like they want to be the master of that then, and that's what they're known for, I guess,
Yeah, and I love that kind of like, mastering the art stuff, which I think is just, because I think mastering the art for me is just that constantly pushing and trying to get better at, relationships, constantly getting better at whatever you're doing. And it's that, in really investing time into it. I do, I do my kind of juggling and all my kind of like plate spinning and stuff. But the reality is that often people just accuse me of trickery when I show them. But it's only because it's just come from a lot of practice.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway.
Yeah. So. And the final, on the fifth point here, I've written here saying care/mayo.
Yeah, with some lettuce and chicken. It's really nice.
Yeah, tell me about that.
It's one of my. Well, I love this story, and I'm conscious of our kind of time constraints here. So, effectively, my all-time hero is a guy called Elton Mayo.
Mayo. Okay.
So Elton Mayo is a psychologist, and most of his work was done at the turn of the century, and it's fascinating. And he was exploring some of the how we would motivate team members, and there's obviously what's called the kind of motivators, and there's what's called the hygiene factors. So hygiene factors are things like salary, the company you work for, the relationship you have with your manager. These are basically hygiene factors. Maybe the office you sit in, a corner office overlooking the bay or whatever. That's like a hygiene factor. And the problem with hygiene factors is that they're quite expensive, and B, they have a kind of like a relatively short shelf life. So, if I have this lovely corner office, it becomes almost the norm for me. If I drive a Ferrari, it becomes the norm. Yeah. So, I'm not necessarily I get early motivation from buying the Ferrari and having the lovely office, but very quickly it just kind of drops away. But the really kind of big motivators, things like, this piece around achieving stuff, really being recognized for doing that sense of responsibility, that kind of real sense of, being part of being cared for and loved. So Mayo wanted to try and do some research to establish, the validity, really, the relative stuff here. So he was given an opportunity with a company called the Illinois Electric Company. So the Illinois Electric Company basically were manufacturing electric light bulbs. And so what they wanted to do, they wanted to do some of these kind of hygiene factors and some of these, I've lost my train of thought now. They wanted to do some of these hygiene factors and motivators, and actually, perhaps increase people's salaries, right?
Okay.
Perhaps improve the working conditions, perhaps give, better education, better learning for team members. So to do this, like any good experiment, they ran a control site and a test site. So in the control site, they would do nothing at all. In the test site, they would experiment with all the motivators and the hygiene factors. Simple. What happened is over 18, 20 months, they saw a a steady increase in the production of light bulbs, which was their measure. So they wanted to see how many more light bulbs they could get these employees to make in this period. What they couldn't understand was that in the control factory, when none of these things were being worked, they were still seeing a steady increase in the production of light bulbs, right? And so it was actually matching. Although they'd increased the salaries in the test site and they'd given uniforms and training and increased the safety, they're still seeing both these factories increasing more light bulbs. So, like any normal kind of business would probably do, I thought obviously this is a waste of time. But why are we giving people always money, extra money, and they're giving all these extra sort of like support things, and we're not getting any difference? And these guys over here in this other factory are still working their nuts off and making these light bulbs. So that's fine. So they kind of pulled the plug on the project, and they reset, and they took Mark's salary down, because Mark was one of the guys making the light bulbs. They took his salary down. Everyone's kind of going, no, it's going to be a disaster, because what happened, obviously the production of light bulbs is going to like plummet, right? So, but actually what happened was that the production of light bulbs continued to grow. So they were obviously then kind of scratching their heads. So there's something going on here that we're not really factoring in to the equation. And what they then found was that they polluted their own data. Okay. So because as part of their trying to capture data and testing levels of motivation, they'd gone back into the factory. So they'd gone back into the control factory, and they were having regular meetings with the team in the control factory and asking them how they were feeling. Okay. To try to capture the data. Yeah. So, and then they shared the data with the control factory and the test factory. And they said, well, can you explain why you were making more light bulbs? And what they heard repeatedly was that they sensed that the employers and the management cared about the employees. Yeah. Because they were listening to them. Yeah. They were sitting down with them regularly and talking to them. So the reason I love the mayor stuff is don't underestimate the importance of relationships. It's a nice little loop we've been on, really. Yeah. Because I know that, being authentic and actually genuinely leading with careness and kindness, and actually, understanding the individual is so important, because it's their discretionary effort, right? If they feel they're being mistreated and just abused and just being treated as like some kind of like commodity, they're not going to put in the extra effort. They're not going to stand up and open the door for you. They're not going to basically make sure the bathroom is clean. They're just doing the minimum they can to get before they can go home and see their kids. Yeah. So, for me, care, being genuine and kind with your team is absolutely critical.
Thanks for listening and watching, everybody. As I mentioned before, you could have been anywhere else, but you've been here with me along this journey, and I appreciate that. Now, if you like this, please give it a like and a share and a follow. I'm trying to spread this across the community, and that simple press of a button is going to be able to do that. So let's help the community out here by giving it a like, share, and a follow. Thank you, everyone, and I'll see you next week.